Another thing that we wanted to do is in many of our presentations that we get the chance to do together and separately, we've been trying to describe some concepts that relate to generative technology that make it different from other technology, that make it, like Ethan Mollick, who's probably one of our favorite thought leaders, says, very weird. One of the weird things about the technology is that it was released without an instruction manual. We have no specific way to use it. And it seems like the companies and technologists that create it don't have a particular interest in telling us how to use it, which is great. But there are different concepts that relate to that weirdness that we want to both describe for people and then explain how we think this is important and why we think it's important for lawyers to understand as they're trying to get their arms around it. So one of the first topics, Bridget, it would be great if you could explain for our listeners, is this concept that came out of a paper I think that Ethan and other professors wrote last year. And it's this concept of the jagged frontier of capabilities. What does that mean?
Yeah, I've used this many times since I read it in one of Ethan's blog posts. I'm just going to fess up right now. I never read the actual paper. I usually read Ethan's descriptions for regular people about the papers rather than the papers themselves. But I find it a super useful term because it resonates so much if you use the technology. And what they mean by it is that the technology is excellent at some things. I mean, frankly, better than humans at some things that humans do. And when you find those, you're, like we described earlier, kind of amazed and delighted, and you want to keep using it and figuring out what else it can do. And then there are other things that you would expect it would be good at that it's not very good at. Now, and some things we know it's not good at. It's not yet great at math. It's getting better at math. It's not yet great at math. So things that are sort of math adjacent, you can probably reason your way to, oh, it's not going to be great at that. But then there are just some other things that you would expect it would be good at, and it's not. And the only way to figure it out is to push to the edge and see if it works. And so that's why Ethan and others call it the jagged edge, the jagged frontier, because some things work and some things don't. And I think this is so important because I meet people who I think started with one of those use cases that it turned out not to be great at, or turned out to be sort of middle school level good at, which isn't that great if you're a lawyer, for example. And they might get discouraged or not discouraged. They might just think, well, this isn't very useful to me, and they move on with their life and they go back to everything they used to do instead of going and trying another thing that it might turn out to be excellent at and save them gobs of time and this other thing that they also have to do every day. And that is a really complicated place for a technology to sit if it wants to grow a user base, for I think those reasons that I just explained. And I've thought about how that maps onto legal, but I wonder what you say. Do you think that that causes extra uptake issues for lawyers, or sort of the same?
I think it creates a lot of complexity in having the conversation in your organization, even with just people you work with, because like you said, if you are sitting and you're talking to two lawyers and they've tried the same exact type of technology, let's say GPT-4 or Claude or something like that, but they've prompted it with different questions, and one of them got amazing results and the other got really disappointing results because one's outside the frontier, one's inside the frontier, they think they're arguing about the same experience when they're having a totally different conversation, and they both may be right. And you don't really know, if you're trying to help people understand the technology, what prompts they've actually used and whether those fall inside or outside the frontier, or whether this person is particularly skeptical, even if it was inside the frontier. So level setting and making sure that people are trying many different attempts to understand the technology and trying them over time, because the frontier keeps changing as the technology learns more and more. I think that makes it so strange in terms of how you have a unified conversation for people. But I think at least recognizing that there is this frontier is a helpful first step. And I almost want to create a visual for people where there is a frontier and you're sort of putting post-its inside and outside the frontier and then continuing to test it over time to see how that frontier changes.
Yeah, that's a great point about how the frontier today isn't necessarily going to be the frontier tomorrow or next week, or certainly not 3 months from now. So you have to kind of keep at it to figure out where the edges are.
Yeah,
That's right.
100%.
So what about the the uneven law of AI distribution? That's another term that I think we both use now in presentations, and I find just really true in my own life. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so I know we're going to share our resources at the end, but I hear this most frequently from the hosts of the artificial intelligence show. Paul Reitzer and Mike Kaput have talked about this. I think there's a great blog post that Paul Reitzer wrote about it. But the idea essentially is that everybody is at a different place right now, at least in understanding what generative AI is, what its capabilities are, and what impact it will have on the world and our work. And that's another thing that makes it difficult to have sort of a uniform conversation with a group of attorneys or legal professionals or judges. People think that they're knowledgeable maybe, but they're not as knowledgeable as somebody else in the group, or there's another person who maybe is a little bit bashful that they haven't kept pace with what's happening. So I try to start every presentation I do with some of these concepts, including this one. This might feel infantilizing to you that we're going to start here, but we can actually move forward with a conversation as an organization or a team without level setting at the moment and moving forward. And how do you think this impacts, Bridget? We're working in a world with 4 different generations for the first time, maybe in some places 5 different generations if you have people who are very senior in the organization. What does this mean in the context of that complexity too?
I think it creates a lot of opportunities for bridging some of what feel like pretty sticky generational divide post pandemic. At least I have found in a number of workplaces and organizations I've been talking to, but it's interesting how many presentations I have done or talks I've given where I've heard from a very senior person. I'm really glad I am, at retirement age and I don't have to figure all of this out. And I think that's too bad because I actually, think like every other hard problem, we're usually better off if we have people contributing to it with different perspectives. But I have heard that quite a bit. But my guess is there are probably some Gen Zers who feel, like they wish they can't retire. But like, there's a whole lot out there that they have to learn, and it feels like it's moving so fast, and it's intimidating. I have a bunch of 20-something kids, and they're not all equally committed to technology, and the ones that aren't, I think, are like, God, do I have to learn all that now too? There's a lot out there to learn, and it's changing so quickly that this is important to remember when you're working with an organization that we probably all have different levels of knowledge and experience, and we should all be able to be comfortable talking about that and learning about that. Everybody's learning, and that's going to be true for a while.
Yeah. And I agree. I think it's really exciting too that this is so new, that if you like learning, and I think most lawyers do like learning and most legal professionals like learning, you can lead your efforts no matter which level you're at. And we're going to talk in a little bit about how associates and junior lawyers can get involved. But there was some interesting research that just came out last week, I think, about how sophisticated or wise junior usage of generative technology is. And there is sort of this myth of the digital native that just because you're younger, you will have a better understanding of how to deploy technology. And it turns out, based on this research with BCG consultants, that's not necessarily the case, that you also need experience and judgment to know how best to deploy these technologies, which I think is another interesting thing that maybe senior leaders don't fully appreciate. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to involve your junior lawyers. But as we're thinking about all generations, and maybe juniors in particular, but everybody across the board, there's this other concept that we both really enjoy, thinking about, talking about, and that is the concept of the secret cyborg, which sounds so sci-fi. What is the secret cyborg, Bridget?
Secret Cyborg, I think, also came from Ethan Malik, but I use it now all the time when I'm talking to lawyers in particular who are reluctant to figure out what all of this technology means for their business. I had an example of this just recently at a conference with a very excellent senior lawyer who is the managing partner of his firm. It's a smaller firm, but a firm that does international business in Colorado. And he said, "Oh no, we're not ever going to know. We're not doing anything with AI. No way." You know, he just had a lot of assumptions about how it was unsafe and was too risky. And there were a couple of his junior lawyers at the same conference, and they were sort of nearby, and they were sort of smiling. And I said, "What do you guys think? And do you agree?" And they're like, "We think we should probably actually figure out what tools might, be good for the practice." And so then I just started asking about what they're doing. So the secret cyborg is those people in your organization that are using it, whether you have told them to or not. They're I guess usually not, because the secret cyborg is secret. So you might think that, your organization is generative AI free, but we're here to tell you it is not generative AI free. Maybe they're not using it on their work computer. Maybe they're using it on their personal devices. And maybe they're using it on the personal devices during work hours or after work hours. But they're using it without any guidance or instruction from you about how to use it in a way that complies with your, the other policies that are important to your business and your practice. And that carries with it much greater risk than any risk of having your team, using it safely with guidance and teaching and training. Have you encountered interesting secret cyborg issues in legal that are worth flagging?
I have not had any secret cyborgs unveil themselves to me as a secret
Yeah.
cyborg, but having been a junior attorney under a lot of pressure and stress and not really knowing what I'm doing, and I'm picking on juniors here, I think this is across generations, but I can certainly understand the temptation when you have a machine as powerful as a GPT frontier model of asking it to help you draft something. And I think that's something that organizations need to be aware of. And we say this frequently, but I always imagine us 10 or 20 years from now looking back on the conversations that we had at the dawn of this and sort of the rush to ban GPT technology everywhere. And I think we will very soon enter a world where malpractice insurers or risk managers are requiring or strongly encouraging organizations to create internal proprietary GPT models that people can use to avoid this. I did hear a funny anecdote somewhere along the way where a law firm partner said that he was relieved to find a typo in a brief because he knew a human had produced it because GPT doesn't have any typos in it. So AI detection technology is notoriously fallible, and there's no real way for you to know whether a secret cyborg created this or an associate within your organization. So I think it's an important thing for firms to be thinking about, especially, like you said, the ones that insist that they are Gen AI free.